So this is the second video in the multiple angle and product to sum formulas section. I'm going to keep this a lot more brief than the last one. Basically this section is just trying to get you to be familiar with all of these formulas. These are the half angle formulas, and you will see these again for sure when you take calculus. And so I'm just going to do two problems out of these, and that should get you in a pretty good place. I'll make a couple other videos for the remaining formulas. But again, we're just manipulating these formulas, and in this first section we're being asked to use the half angle formulas to determine the exact values of sine, cosine, and tangent of the angle. So if you're thinking of your unit circle on this one, you do know that there is no pi over 12, and so the only way we can get an exact answer for sine, cosine, and tangent is if we can find an angle that is on the unit circle, and we're going to be able to do that by doing the half angle formulas here. So really they're very straightforward. The only thing that is just how do you get your angle that you're going to manipulate. And so if we're looking at sine here first, we're looking for the sine of pi over 12, which is the same as sine, and I'm going to fit it into this statement here. It's the same as pi over 6 over 2, right? So, if you are dividing by 2, then really what we're doing is multiplying this original by 2, right? And so then this simplifies back to pi over 12. And so then in our formula, or formulas, right, we just found all of them, we're going to use the value of pi over 6. And now all it is just plugging it in. The plus and minus is determined, as it says down there, by whatever quadrant you're in, and that'll show up in our next example. But right now we're saying 1 minus cosine of pi over 6. And again, sure enough, pi over 6 is on the unit circle, and that was the whole idea of everything, is that we could fit it onto there. And now we're just going to simplify this down. So then we have plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, again, check your unit circle if you're not up on all of these, but it's 1 minus radical 3 over 2. And then the formula says over 2. We're going to just simplify that from here. 1 is the same as 2 over 2. And so then we would have all of that inside the square root, which can be simplified by your keep, change, flip thing that you guys like to do. And we can simplify this one more step because of the 4 in the denominator. We can actually take that out as a 1/2 times the square root of 2 minus radical 3, all inside the square root. Okay, so that's sine. If you noticed, the formula for cosine is extremely similar. So let me get to that. Right, the only difference between the sine and cosine is the sign here. Right, that's a minus and that's a plus. We're finding the same value, so there's really no need to really go through a whole bunch of this, for the cosine. So again, we're finding the cosine of pi over 12. You can't find that on the unit circle, so we're really finding the cosine of pi over 6 over 2. And again, it's the same formula essentially. So we're just doing this. Again, I'm not going to write this out. And I suggest you don't either. I mean, all you're doing is just changing the sign of our other answer, and so we can get all the way down to say that the exact answer of cosine of pi over 12 is the same as plus or minus 1/2 radical 2 plus radical 3. Or however you say that. That's the answer there. Okay, so then the only other one that we have to do, oh good grief, right, is the tangent. And you can use either one of these. They are equivalent, right? For this purpose, I'm just going to use this one, so I don't have to do too much in the denominator, okay? But they are the same. So then we have the tangent of pi over 12 is the same as the tangent of pi over 6 over 2. And so then we can say, great, that is the same as 1 minus cosine of pi over 6 all over sine of pi over 6. Okay, and this is just a little, the other part of the formula we could have used is a little more simplifying. So then what we have is 1 minus radical 3 over 2 again, and the sine of pi over 6 is just 1/2. And this is a quick simplifying step here because we can just multiply both top and bottom by 2. Don't forget to distribute. And we would get 2 minus square root of 3 over 1, and so that is your answer for the tangent. So, really easy stuff. Just pay attention. The only thing that you got to really worry about is how to get this angle, right? And you're just taking whatever it is and multiplying it by 2, and then you can use these formulas. Okay, so this is no different than the section just like it that was with the double angle formula. We're just using the half angle formula instead. All of these u's are an angle, but we don't have the angle, and so that should be your hint to determine, we need an angle, and so we're going to have to set up a right triangle to find all of the sides. I picked the cotangent just because it's a little bit different to think about. This statement is telling us which quadrant we're in, right? If you're familiar with your unit circle, this is down in the third quadrant, and that's going to help us determine the sign of sine and cosine. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this out. Right, we're down here somewhere. Here's u. Tangent is sine over cosine. So cotangent is cosine over sine, and that means that's adjacent over opposite. Notice that the sign is positive here. That's because this value will be negative and this value is negative, and that's how they get a positive out of that. So then we're going to have a -3 for this side and a -1 for this side. We're going to use Pythagorean's theorem. Get rid of this here, maybe. Let me try this. There we go. Look at this. I can do a little work. We do need to find the hypotenuse, right? And so the hypotenuse is the same as this. Remember that the hypotenuse is always going to be positive when you do that. And so now we have all the sides of our right triangle, and so that means we can create all of the ratios, and that means we can find all the exact values, which is what we're being asked to do for sine, cosine, and tangent. And they say sine of u over 2, cosine of u over 2, and tangent of u over 2. So, again, this is really all about just helping you learn these formulas and kind of some of the stuff that you can do with it. Now, the sine and cosine formulas have a plus and a minus, we're going to use minus on both of these. And there's a couple ways to remember that. You can remember that the third quadrant produces negatives for sine and cosine. I think that's a statement sometime that we made. Or you just remember that the ratio of sine is opposite over hypotenuse, and so a negative divided by a positive, this is always positive, is going to be negative. So I'm not going to write both plus and minus here. I'm just going to write minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of u over 2. And since we have the right triangle now, we know what the cosine of u is, right? That's adjacent over hypotenuse. And now all we're doing is simplifying from here. So then we have a negative square root of, right, I'll try to simplify this. Right, I got a common denominator there of the square root of 10. And that's still all over 2. And then I'm going to rationalize the numerator. So by multiplying by the square root of 10, so then we get 10 plus 3 square root of 10 over 10, and that's still over 2. Doing the keep change flip for you and get 10 plus 3 radical 10 all over 20. And the only other step that we can do from there is take out a 4. And what I mean by that is, right, 20 is 4 times 5, so the square root of 4 is 2. So the only other thing that we can do is say, well, this is really negative 1/2 times the square root of 10 plus 3 radical 10 over 5. So that's an exact answer. And that we're being asked to do cosine as well. Cosine, like I said in the previous example, is just the same as sine except for an opposite sign. So I'm not going to go through all that. You're welcome to do all of that if you would like. But cosine of u over 2 for the triangle we had is just going to be still negative 1/2 here because we're in that third quadrant. And then this is going to be the difference. And if you want, you can go through all the steps we just went through except for the opposite sign there. And finally, we're going to go do tangent. So tangent of u over 2 is the same as, and again, it doesn't matter which one of these you use. We do have to simplify it, but I'm just using the first one. So then we have 1 minus, right, cosine of u is negative 3, so I'm going to change that to a positive, so plus 3 over radical 10. And let's go check out what our sine is. Yeah, wrong thing. Okay. So sine, right, opposite over hypotenuse, so negative 1 over radical 10. And we can simplify this pretty easily. I'm just going to multiply both numerator and denominator by the negative square root of 10. That's going to leave us with a positive 1 in the denominator. And we'll get negative square root of 10 minus 3. And usually they write that as negative 3 minus radical 10. Okay? So I think everything else should be, as long as you watch that first video, everything else should be pretty easy from there. You're just playing around with these formulas, and I'll come back with another, I think, 2 more videos for you guys. So please ask if you need to.